And hello and welcome to Scotland at 7. I'm Hugh Stewart. I'm going to begin tonight's programme as usual with our coronavirus update. As of 2 p.m. today, a total of 3,376,085 people in Scotland have tested through the NHS Scotland Labs or the UK Government regional testing centres since the start of the pandemic. Of these, 2,748,488 have been confirmed negative, while 627,597 have tested positive. There are 2,262 new cases of COVID confirmed by a test, although not everyone with the virus will display symptoms, and not all those with symptoms will be tested. There are unfortunately 20 reported deaths of people who have tested positive. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection now stands at 9,072. This number only includes those who have died having received a positive test for the virus in the previous 28 days. Of the people who have tested positive, 917 were in hospital last night, 59 of whom were in intensive care. As of 8 a.m. today, 4,309,932 people have received their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccination, and 3,897,133 have received their second dose. The latest UK daily figures show 139,834 patients who have tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 263 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings, not just in hospitals. In the week ending the 16th of October 2021, the COVID-19 infection rate in England increased to 1.79%. Hospital admissions of COVID-19 confirmed patients increased to 7.2 per 100,000 people, and that's in the week ending the 17th of October 21. In the week ending the 16th of October, the estimated percentage of the community population that had COVID-19 was, as I said, 1.79% in England, that's 1 in 55 people, 2.31% in Wales, which is 1 in 45, 0.76% in Northern Ireland, that's 1 out of 130 people, and 1.14% in Scotland, which is 1 in 90 people. The number of deaths from all causes in the UK in the week ending 15th of October 21 was 12,845, which is 14.8% above the average for a corresponding week from 2015 to 2019. Deaths were above the 5-year average in all UK countries. Of all deaths registered in the week ending 15th of October, 890 involved the COVID infection. That's 65 more than the previous week, and that's a 7.9% increase. Deaths involving COVID-19 accounted for 1 in 14 deaths approximately. That's 6.9%. Now, earlier today, the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, gave her statement to Parliament on the government's current plans to fight the pandemic of COVID-19. And tonight I'm going to discuss this and other stories with our guest, Chris McCusker, who joins us from, I think you're on the south side of Glasgow, Chris? Is that where you are tonight?
Yeah, that's exactly where I'm, Hugh.
Right, it's good, about as far south as you can get. So before you're out of our territory altogether. So I'm in the centre of Glasgow here, where a lot will be happening over the next week or so. Anyway, David, I'm going to begin by just reviewing what the First Minister had to say to Parliament today about the current plans, and then we'll see maybe if you have any comments on that. So to Parliament today, Nicola Sturgeon, first of all, and the other party leaders paid tribute to the late MP for Southend in England, David Ames, who of course was killed while holding a constituent surgery last week. On COVID, the First Minister explained that the government has no immediate plans to make any changes to its COVID mitigations. The First Minister pointed out that the level of infections in Scotland are the lowest out of the 4 UK nations, but are still worrying at about 2,500 new infections on average every day. And Ms Sturgeon told Parliament that 87% of all those aged 18 have now had 2 doses of a COVID vaccine, but nonetheless said the situation remains fragile as we approach winter, warning that the virus hasn't gone away. People are again advised to wear face coverings in public, clean the hands and surfaces, and to work from home wherever possible. Now, Chris, that seems to me, in one way, that's going along with the UK, business as usual, don't panic scenario. But there are some differences there, aren't there? For instance, work at home. The First Minister clearly said today, if it can be arranged, you should just work online, stay at home.
Yeah, well, that's a stark departure from the message that's coming out of Westminster at this moment in time. They're urging people back into the offices purely for capitalist reasons. Of course, there's empty offices that aren't getting any rent, so that's the theory behind that. I think it's a case of. I personally think that COP 26 came along at a slightly inopportune moment. So therefore, the Scottish Government are going to proceed as they have been doing on a sort of like a Ca-Canny approach, and it will be visited on a week-to-week basis as to if there are going to be any further restrictions imposed on the country. I mean, there's a vast amount of people descending into Glasgow. Predominantly, the majority of them will be foreign nationals. And that's from X amount of dignitaries, broadcasters, news reporters, photographers, you name it. So it's something that needs to be monitored, pretty much on a day-to-day basis. I just hope that we don't get further restrictions because of it.
Well, indeed. In fact, I'll just fast forward. Since you've raised the subject, the First Minister also dealt with the COVID impact of the weekend's conference, and of course, the United Nations COP26 summit is here. In fact, starting on Sunday. In fact, some people are arriving already for pre-conference meetings. Now, today, the First Minister said in Parliament that the COP26 gathering is indeed challenging. The government is aware of that. And in fact, she went on to say that they do believe that COP26 does pose a risk of increased COVID transmission. So to mitigate, what the government is planning to do is to say, and in fact, this has already been agreed with the UN organisers and the UK government. The measures inside the blue zone will be pretty similar to measures outside it. Delegates are expected to wear masks. Delegates are expected to be tested every day. Furthermore, delegates arriving from certain countries may have to be tested before they are allowed in. Some people may, in fact, be invited to quarantine told to quarantine for 10 days. The government's saying, on the one hand, yeah, let's just carry on. We don't expect any more mitigation, but they're also saying, yes, this is going to be a problem. We know that there is going to be an increased transmission because of the huge, how many people are going to be coming to Glasgow over the next week or two? A lot.
Well, there are anecdotal reports that it could be an influx of up to 10,000 people, and that's possibly including all the certain entourages and whatnot, and what have you, and various hangers on. But you have to add into the fact that there'll be a significant, shall we say, amount of activists on the streets as well. More notably, the all under one banner, and the amalgamation of various groups that are planning to make their presence known in the face of Boris Johnson saying that, he wants the place festooned with Union Jacks. And they're determined to make sure that the place is going to be festooned with saltires, which is fair play to them. It's our city and it's our flag, so it's only right that we should show our solidarity for our own country. And there is going to be a significant presence from the Extinction Rebellion crowd. So if you add that on, there could be in excess of 20, maybe 25,000 extra people in the city over the period. And that's obviously, it's going to put an awful lot of pressure on the city. And that's not being helped with the shall I say, childish rhetoric that's coming out of the Tory party at the moment when they're talking about the state of Glasgow and whatnot, what have you. So I'm not even going to get down that road with them and stuff like that. It's very, very childish.
No, we'll leave that to it. That's maybe another story. But on that point, yes, I've heard there might be even more people than that. People have talked about over 100,000 as well as the delegates. Yes, as you say, Chris, there's all sorts of people will be turning up to Glasgow with a point to make next week. So we're going to have to readdress it. We will certainly be returning to the COP26 conference throughout this week. In fact, that's the major thing that Broadcasting Scotland is going to be covering for the next 3 weeks, of course, is COP26 and events around that. So just before we come back to that, Chris, we're going to discuss climate change in a few minutes. So I'll just finish up on the First Minister's statement. She finally made the point about the booster jag, the third jag. The First Minister pointed out today that half a million Scots have now had the booster jag. And she reminded Parliament that it can't really be any more than 500,000 at the moment because there has to be a gap of at least 6 months since your second vaccination. So if you received your second vaccination in July or July or August, you can't expect to get your booster jag till something like January, right? So that's the First Minister's statement, right? Hang on, right? It will be coming, but there's got to be a 6 month gap. Okay, I'm going to move on now, Chris, and we're going to talk about a report which was published today, or maybe it was published yesterday, but it's in all the papers today. The United Nations is warning that if we continue with business as usual on greenhouse emissions, then forget about 1.5% warming. The planet is going to be 2.7 centigrade higher by the end of the century, right? So I won't be around then, but there's going to be a lot of water by that time, Chris. So let's just give me the figures. According to the United Nations report, the current pledges that all the governments have given to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases are not enough. Far from keeping global warming below the 2 Celsius, or even the desired 1.5 Celsius increase compared to pre-industrial times, current plans are going to see global warming reach 2.7 centigrade by the end of this century. That's where we're heading at the moment. And in fact, last week, the United Nations World Meteorological Organization, ahead of the COP26 here in Glasgow, said that CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere hit a record high last year. If the world is to keep warming below 2 degrees centigrade, a 30% cut in greenhouse gases is needed, and to keep temperature rises below 1.5 would require a 55% cut in emissions. And in fact, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres said, if there is no meaningful reduction in the next decade, we will have lost forever the possibility to reach 1.5 degrees. And just finally on the report, the United Nations data shows that if you take 143 countries responsible for 57% of the emissions, the pledges they are bringing to Glasgow next week would bring their emissions down to 9% of their 2010 level by 2030. I hope this all makes sense. There's a lot of numbers here. But that's only if they fully implement what they've promised to do. However, that was 143 countries, really. Now, if you include all of the 192 countries who were present at the Paris talks in 2015, then all of the emissions will rise by 16%. So rather than falling, emissions are actually planned to rise. And finally, China and India have not made any pledge to toughen their emissions limits. And China and India are responsible for 30% of the world's global warming. Okay, so compared to their climate goals, all major economies are set to double the amount of coal, oil, and gas, which they should. Now, what that means, if they were keeping to the commitments they've already made, they would need to be reducing the production of coal, oil, and gas, reducing it by a lot. And just finally, I hope the people are making a note of these numbers. I might ask questions later, Chris. Currently, the world emits almost 60 gigatons of greenhouse gases. This amount needs to be more or less halved by 2030. That's to keep it to 1.5 degrees, or at least cut by 13 gigatons to keep the temperature rise below 2 degrees. Okay, Chris, the United Nations says the clock is ticking. So are we paying any attention to it?
Well, I think Scotland is certainly paying attention to it. I don't think that the UK are paying attention to it. I think they're paying an awful lot of lip service towards it because it's not the common diet of your average capitalist to pay attention to the environment. So I don't have any confidence in Boris Johnson making any great inroads towards the reduction of these figures in any significant fashion. Boris Johnson is on record as saying that, whether it's, it's a case of it's touch and go as to whether these targets could be achievable. And he was referring there to the targets that were set at the 2015 Paris Agreement.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have an awful lot of confidence in Boris Johnson doing hee-haw, to be quite honest with you. I have every confidence in an independent Scotland radically changing the direction of travel that, sadly, we are having to, we are subjected to, because many of the issues that we don't hold the levers in order to change, because they are reserved to Westminster. They can only be achieved by Scotland being independent and by being able to freely work with our European neighbours. You can hark back to an awful lot of facts and figures that have been brilliantly reported by Leslie Riddoch. When we're looking at the direction of travel of the Nordic countries, that Scotland could well replicate the model that they've adopted, which would give Scotland a slim chance to achieving the targets that are set, which incidentally, the targets that Scotland set is 5 years ahead of the English government, if I'm right in recalling that. So I think we're going for 2045, and I think the English government, in some reports that I've read, they have quoted 2050. And as you say, Hugh, neither myself nor your good self will be around at that point in time. But at the end of the day, it's worth taking the action now, so that our children and our grandchildren don't inherit an absolute unmitigated disaster.
Well, absolutely. Unmitigated is actually the word. Are we going to mitigate? Yes, it'll be interesting to see what happens when polluting countries, now we're a polluting country, of course, come here next week. I was interested to hear that Scott Morrison, for example, the Prime Minister of Australia, is in fact coming. Now, he, of course, is a huge emitting country. Now, to be fair, Chris, he's got a lot of coal. Australia's got an awful lot of coal. So we're going to have to say to Australia, you've got to keep that coal in the ground. We've got a lot of oil, and we're going to have to say, and it's going to stay there. It's going to stay under the ground. You mentioned the capitalist system and profits earlier on. Yeah, there's a lot of money in the ground. How are you going to persuade people to say there's billions of pounds under there and you're not going to touch it? It's quite a tall order, isn't it?
Yeah, but what the way to convince people is to win the argument of a true green transition from fossil fuel usage to a more sustainable usage of hydropower, wind power, and sea power as well. And the UK government, I think, have dropped the biggest clanger that they have could ever have dropped in the last 2 years by ignoring the proposed uh, uh, carbon capture operation in
Yeah.
St
Yeah, the
Fergus.
St.
So,
Fergus field. Yes,
you know,
that's an important point,
yeah.
actually, Chris. I'm glad you raised that because we, in Broadcasting Scotland, we have been looking into that story, and we're going to return to that as a main feature. In fact, in a couple of days, and
Yeah, but you see,
that
the,
actually leads me to the next story because, in fact, this is to do with the infrastructure and how can we use the existing network, the pipelines and electricity grid. Because there was today, actually, in the House of Commons in London, an intervention by Alan Brown, Member of Parliament. Now, what he's talking about is the grid charging for an electricity producer to be putting electricity into a national grid. Of course, it's about cost. It's about who can provide electricity at the lowest cost. But the electricity grid actually charges us for having our electricity in the system. Now, Alan Brown has put forward a bill which aims to review the mismanagement of the energy grid charges in Scotland. Mr Brown today called in the House of Commons for a complete overhaul of the grid charging structure within the UK, which currently leaves Scotland subjected to the highest grid charges in Europe and therefore at a competitive disadvantage to England. Scotland currently has 25% of Europe's offshore wind capacity. However, grid charges implemented by the UK government mean that Scottish wind farms are 20% more expensive than wind farms south of the border. Mr Brown's bill will seek to abolish locational charges altogether and move to a system more like that operated in most EU countries. Meanwhile, in Scotland, Cabinet Secretary for Net Zero, Michael Matheson, has called on the UK government to reverse its illogical decision not to back the Scottish Carbon Capture and Utilisation and Storage Cluster, that's the CCUS cluster, which includes the ACON project that Chris referred to up at St Fergus, Aberdeen. In a statement to the Scottish Parliament, he underlined how CCUS, carbon capture, is a crucial element of Scotland's decarbonisation as we move towards a just transition to net zero. He reiterated the Scottish Government's support for the CCUS scheme and the Scottish cluster, adding that it's the most cost-effective and deliverable project of its kind in the UK. The cluster also estimates that it can support an average of 15,100 jobs from 2022 up to 2050, reaching a peak of 20,600 jobs in 2031. The Scottish cluster was not awarded clear and definitive Track 1 status by the UK government last week and is instead a reserve cluster. So, Chris, the point you are making is that Scotland would like to move forward with green initiatives such as carbon capture, but we don't actually have the power to make it happen.
Yeah, that's entirely correct, and it's I don't mean to sound like, oh well, look, I actually do. I need to get onto Labour's case because you know it pains me to point out to Labour the fact that whilst the likes of employment law and is reserved to Westminster, Scotland will never be able to move on. So the only way the UK government will never devolve that particular reserved matter. Whilst we're in this unholy alliance, and the only way that it will happen is through independence. But it is closely linked to what we're discussing at this moment in time, because there's under the reserved and devolved competences that we currently are restricted under. Scotland is very limited as to what it can do. I mean, yes, okay, we can do a lot with regards research and development and stuff like that. But uh, closely linked to that is the rights of employment. There's also closely linked to that as well. There's trade union representation and stuff like that. That's all reserved to London. It's all centrally controlled. Within the M25 orbital. So until that is freed up and Scotland is allowed to formulate its own laws with regards employment rights and trade union rights, workers' rights, and all the rest of it, which will be closely aligned with all the conformities as laid down by the EU, because it's not that Scotland, wishes to lay down in front of the EU, but Scotland actually wants to replicate what the EU standard is, and that goes from right the way through, from workers' rights to employment rights and everything that's connected to that. Because make no mistake, back in 2015, the Tory government absolutely ripped shreds out of the trade union bill, and workers in Britain at this moment in time have lost a lot of latitude that was gained, by the Labour Party, I have to admit, from the late 50s, the early 60s, into the 70s and the 80s. And people can turn around and sort of laugh at me and say, well, what about all the pit closures, what about all the steel closures and all the rest of it? At the end of the day, those closures, lamentable as they are, were inevitably going to happen as we, transition into a more greener, sustainable energy usage. It's just that the pernicious way that Thatcher done it was more grievous to the actual workers, because it was done as a cliff edge cull. It wasn't done with transition in mind.
Well, I think that's a good point, actually.
All those steel workers and all those coal workers and all that car manufacturing that used to happen in Scotland, they had nothing, to transition into.
Exactly.
It was just a scythe right down the shop floor, and that was it. You were
exactly
out.
Yeah, that's a transition, is it? In fact, Michael Matheson himself, of course, used the phrase transition, and I don't know if he said the word just transition, but that's, of course, the phrase that the Scottish government uses. I think it comes from the Green Party, who are, of course, in partnership with the SNP and the Scottish government.
I actually hate to correct you, Hugh, but it actually comes from the SNP trade union group.
Oh,
we
right.
were the first ones to actually. We were the first ones to actually advocate for a just transition.
Okay.
The Greens picked up on it.
Good. Well, as long as they did, right? Okay. Well, thanks for putting me right there. But that actually is a very interesting lead into the next topic we're going to discuss tonight, Chris. Len McCusker, the former trade union boss, I think he has a book out now. He was on Good Morning Scotland this morning. And among other things, he said that if Labour wants to try and come back in Scotland, they should support an independence referendum. Mr McCusker said that Labour was not making any headway in Scotland, and it should wake up and smell the coffee when it comes to its stance on the Constitution. Commenting, SNP, member of the Scottish Parliament, Paul McLennan, said, Len McClusker's comments are a devastating verdict on Scottish Labour's craven attempts to copy the Tories' position on the Constitution. There's a cast iron mandate for an independence referendum, but instead of recognising that reality and accepting democracy, Labour continued disgracefully in trying to collude with Boris Johnson in his bid to thwart the will of the people as expressed in May's Holyrood election, where Labour suffered their worst defeat since the start of devolution. For as long as Scottish Labour continue to ignore voices like Len McClusker, Henry McLeish and very many members of their own party, including their Labour colleagues in Wales, who recognise the right of people to choose independence if they wish. They are doomed to irreverence. That's quite a long quote. But anyway, what he's saying is that some people inside the Labour Party are saying, well, if the Scottish people have voted again to have a referendum, right, maybe we should let it happen.
Well, look, I've got huge regard for Len McCusker. I've met him on a couple of occasions in my association with the Labour Party as well. And look, it's all very well good talking about the fact that Labour should support independence whilst now in retirement. And funnily enough, actually, his successor actually is on record as supporting independence as well. So it'll be curious to see how that stance feeds in, to the whole Labour thing. At this moment in time, Labour, whilst being in control by Anna Sawa, is vehemently opposed to any thought of independence in any such way, shape, or manner. But that's just because Annas is a diehard unionist. So I mean, it's, as I say, it's all well and good supporting independence after you've retired. And when you're sitting on the couch at Good Morning Britain or whatever it's called, or I don't even watch it. So in order to sell a couple of books, then I don't think the book sales will go down too well in Scotland. But
No, perhaps.
Maybe some of my socialist comrades might wait until it goes into the bargain bookshelf. It's
Okay.
again, as I say, it's all fine, fair, and well, for Len McCluskey to be bumping his gums, but where was he in 2014?
Well, indeed, yes, as you say, yes, he's kind of taken a back seat now. But of course, what he's saying, let's not forget, he's not saying I'm all for independence. He's saying at least the right to discuss it should be given to the Scottish Parliament. I don't think it's going to come out for independence, or that would be quite a change anyway. Right, moving on, Chris. So another point that was raised in the Scottish Parliament today, now this is a really, really serious issue that I've just become aware of in the last couple of weeks, and in fact involving people I know. There's this bizarre story of spiking of mainly males, young males, I think, spiking the drinks of young females, and indeed actually assaulting young girls with hypodermic syringes. Now, the Stirling member of the Scottish Parliament, Evelyn Tweed, today raised the question in Parliament, and Evelyn Tweed is going to meet with the Scottish Government about this issue of spiking and date rape in Scotland after she raised the issue in Holyrood today. The Cabinet Secretary for Justice, Keith Brown, agreed to meet Ms Tweed following her question to the Scottish Government about recent reports of drink spiking and spiking by injection. Ms Tweed raised the issue of nightlife safety and spiking incidents with Police Scotland last week, having received pressing concerns from constituents about nightlife safety and spiking incidents in recent weeks. Since then, she's set up meetings with Engender, with Rape Crisis Scotland, and with the Scottish Licensed Trade Association and UK Hospitality Scotland. The Stirling MSP has said that she is determined to do all she can to ensure that the focus is on those who are committing these vile acts, rather than putting the obligation on women to protect themselves. Commenting, Evelyn Tweed MSP said, "I am glad to hear how seriously the Scottish Government is taking recent reports of spiking, either of drinks or by injection. The reports we are seeing are painfully shocking, and it's time we dealt with the root causes. It is unacceptable that in 2021 there's still so much to do to tackle violence against women and girls. Spiking is just the latest manifestation of a sickness in society that we need to tackle." Chris, why are guys doing this? Why are guys actually putting? I've heard rat poison has been detected in toxicology reports. What
Yeah,
makes a young guy take a syringe to a nightclub?
yeah, no, I can't answer as to why young guys are doing this. But then, I would question: is it all guys that are doing it? Maybe females that are doing it as well. I don't know. It's not a new thing. Well, I'm actually sorry, but it has to be said that the fact that there is no evidence to say that it's all men that are actually carrying out this heinous act. Because I can hark back to when I was in college, and it seems to me that this is endemic in the student fraternity, that this is happening. In bars and clubs that are being operated, and mainly inhabited by students. Because it happened to me personally back in '86. I think I was in the warehouse, and somebody spiked my drink. I don't know what the hell was in it, but but I mean, it happened around about 11 o'clock at night, and the next morning I don't remember anything about that night. Thankfully, I wasn't sexually assaulted. I wasn't beaten up. I wasn't robbed. But I was just bundled in a taxi and sent home.
Mhm.
But I don't remember anything about that night whatsoever. So it's not a new thing, and it is wholly right that Parliament are challenging, why it is coming to the fore at this moment in time.
Well, Chris,
And
here
Scottish
abroad,
police need to get Scottish police need to get a complete grip on it. And at this moment in time, what
yeah,
saddens me is the fact that they keep on saying that the various incidents aren't linked. Well, I think that they should be making sure that if there's any links at all between all the major cities in Scotland where it's happening, it has to be coming from one source. It can't be
right.
coming from a
Okay.
various amount of sources. It has to
Well,
be
it's
coming
a
from
yeah,
one
it's a
source.
mystery to me where it's coming from. As I said, there's some weird concoctions which have turned up in toxicology reports. Now, we at Broadcasting Scotland, we don't know who's doing it, obviously. Just from looking at the press reports over the last 2 weeks, they seem to have been suggesting it's mainly young women who have ended up in accident and emergency. I've read several reports on that, but as who did it, obviously we don't know. Again, reading the press reports, I can only see 2 or 3 cases of anyone actually being arrested. So that we don't know much about it tonight. So yeah, who's doing it and why? Well, let's not speculate. But there's one thing that's clear: that's criminal assault, and Police Scotland have been asked to take it seriously. So let's hope. Well, watch this space. Let's hope we don't have to return to that again. Let's hope Police Scotland does indeed get on top of it. We're going to move on now. Now, of course, this is not necessarily a story about criminal behaviour at all. We're going to talk, Chris, about a story of a civil action of Prince Andrew being sued. Now, there's an update to the story about Prince Andrew. He faces a deadline from a New York judge on the case. He's accused by Virginia Goffrey of having sexually assaulted her a few years ago. And a judge in New York has scheduled a date in July 2022 for Prince Andrew to answer questions under oath regarding the sex allegations against him. Andrew has not been charged with any crime. In fact, the Metropolitan Police in London have decided recently to take no action on the matter. His accuser, however, Virginia Goffrey, claims that she was sexually assaulted by the prince, who is 61, when she was 17 and a minor according to US law. She maintains that she was trafficked for sex by Jeffrey Epstein, a convicted sex offender and a friend of Prince Andrew. Ms. Goffrey is seeking damages to an amount that we've not heard. New York Judge Lewis A. Kaplan has set the date of July 14th for submission of all evidence by both parties. Although his lawyers have described the allegations as baseless, This issue has caused massive reputational damage to Prince Andrew and looks like casting a shadow over the Queen's Platinum Jubilee celebrations, which are due next summer. So, of course, Chris, there is no criminal charge. We at Broadcasting Scotland have no evidence one way or another, but the story is that he is being sued. He's being sued by Virginia Goffrey. And although he's been trying to hide away, it looks like he will have to submit his side of the story under oath to a judge in New York. So I wonder how that's going to turn out.
Well, I mean, how it turns out, it's fascinating how it will actually play out, for him, but also the ramifications for the royal family going forward. I mean, I hear that at this moment in time, the Queen, and I honestly, I wish her no harm. I hear that she's not attending COP, due to ill health. So this will probably exasperate that. Because bad news is never travels well. So it'll be, an anxious time, a stressful time for them. But I mean, I mean, going back to what we were discussing earlier, I mean, this all happened back in the day when I think the drug Rohypnol was, commonly linked with spiking cases. And it may be the fact that Prince Andrew, although being a friend of Jeffrey Epstein and being in his company, had no idea what Jeffrey Epstein was up to. That in itself has yet to be proved. You know,
Yes,
it's,
okay.
it's,
Well, as I said
it's,
earlier on, Chris, as I said at the start, there is no criminal case against Prince Andrew, and certainly
no,
Broadcasting Scotland
that is
doesn't have any
absolutely
evidence
correct.
on it.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely correct. And that's exactly what I'm saying. At the moment, it's all been conjecture and speculation as to, was he there, wasn't he there? I mean, I read one report where he actually says, is that my hand on that,
Yeah.
girl's hand, or was it superimposed? I have no idea. I have no idea.
Yes, well,
Uh, I,
we will find more of this in court. So really, all I suppose we just have to wait and see. Really, so the Judge Kaplan will listen to the evidence, and that will be heard in court next July. So really, that's all we can say about that at the moment. Looking at the clock, Chris, I better move on now. Just quickly, international news. We heard yesterday that was a military coup in Sudan, and in fact, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan has led the military takeover which has deposed Sudan's government. He's jailed the Prime Minister, or at least he's put the Prime Minister under house arrest, and he's taken over the TV stations in what various newspapers have described as a bloody coup. The deposed Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok and his ministers have not been seen in public since the takeover. This dramatic intervention brings to an end an unstable power-sharing agreement between the civil and military authorities since 2019. The General has insisted that the former Prime Minister and his family are well at home, and they will be free to leave it once the situation stabilises. He hasn't said how long that's going to take. The General entered public life as a member of the Transitional Council, which was intended to steer the country towards democracy, after the previous Prime Minister Bashir was ousted in 2019. So, Chris, just very briefly, I think that sounds like one of those stories where the flea gets into bed with an elephant. How would you fancy power sharing with the military, right? That doesn't sound like a very stable relationship, doesn't it?
Well, no, it certainly doesn't. And it's a lesser known story that has yet to I think garner any sort of like real sort of like support and interest for because I've when the running order was sent over to me, I had a quick search on Twitter, and there wasn't an awful lot in the actual social media about this. And I do know it was actually raised earlier on today in Parliament by one of the Tory backbenchers. I think Margaret Ferrier made a reference to it as well, or maybe she added a intervention or something like that. But yeah, it hasn't reached an awful lot of traction within, sort of like British news reporting, you know. But it is a worrying time because any change of regime, you know, as will certainly cause friction on both sides, and any regime change which is described as bloody is also very worrying as well, because there's human rights issues to be considered. There's all sorts of various uh, things that are going on, which sometimes the Western world are really, really not privy to. The thing that stood out for me on this story was the fact that although they said that he is being detained at house or at home, I'm wondering whose home it is. Is it his, or is it at the home of the new despot dictator that's taken over? Because nobody is. What's the word? Nobody is immune. No political figure is immune in that country to being arrested at any given one time, and they're thrown in jail, and it's sort of like 7 days before they even have recourse to legal representation. That's so again, it's going to be another changing story, I feel.
Well, all we know from today's reportage is that, according to the general, the Prime Minister is in his own home. In fact, the general says, I was chatting to them yesterday and they were fine. So the official line out of Sudan is that the regime still intends to restore democracy over a couple of years. So let's see if they do. The United Nations has called for a return to democratic institutions immediately, and for the release of the Prime Minister and the cabinet. So we'll just have to see what happens in that story. Now, turning to home news, we've also heard today from Scotland's chief statistician the publication of homicide figures in Scotland up to the year 2021. This publication provides information on crimes of homicide recorded by police in Scotland over the period 20 to 21. The major findings are: between 2019 and 21, the number of homicide cases reported by the police in Scotland decreased by 15%, from 65 to 55, in other words, 10 cases fewer. This is the lowest number of homicide cases reported since comparable records began in 1976. The number of homicide cases in Scotland remained relatively stable in recent years, with between 59 and 65 cases per year from the period of 2012 up to 2020. Over the 10-year period from 2011 up to 2021, the number of homicide cases in Scotland fell by 40%. That's 36 less homicides, from 91 down to 55. In the year 2021, whenever the figures were recorded, because we haven't finished that year yet, but 58 victims of homicide were recorded. 12%, that's 8 fewer than the 66 victims of the previous year. Of the 58 victims, 83%, that's 48 of them, were male. In the 2021, 65 persons were accused of homicide, and 92%, that's 60 of those, were male. All 55 cases of homicide recorded for 20 to 21 were solved by the police. For each of the last 10 years, the most common method of killing was with a sharp instrument. In 2021, a sharp instrument was the main method of killing for 34 homicide victims, which is 59%. Well, Chris, I don't know what to say about that. We were discussing earlier on, is spiking a male or a female thing? But the bad news here is that homicide is a male activity.
Well, according to this report, yeah, I may get into trouble, about it. I would, possibly question it as well.
Well,
You know, there's at the end of the day, violence, whether it's in the home or whether it's out on the street, obviously is abhorrent, and should never happen. I think there is. I think there's a wider question to be asked of the Scottish government. In regards to how they charge and how they treat people who are carrying a knife, whether with or without intent. How cases such as these homicides, which have happened with a sharpened instrument and stuff like that, how they are treated by the Procurator Fiscal and all the rest of it. When dealing and preparing the cases for court, and obviously that should be reflective in the sentence as well. So, but again, yes, it does point to the fact that it's predominantly attached to male activity.
It does seem to be. Although the good news is that the numbers are declining. Of course, one death, the figures don't say so, but these are probably mainly young guys. One death is tragic anyway. So at least the numbers have been going the right way. So perhaps the overall tendency to regard violence as more of a health measure rather than a criminal measure does seem to be paying dividends, in that the numbers are down at least. So just looking at the clock, Chris, we better move on. We'll have to move on now, Chris. We've got a couple of things I think we really need to discuss before we wind up tonight's show. First of all, our final story tonight from the Scottish Government is that the government is investing another 10 million to help patients avoid a hospital stay where possible, and to prevent delayed discharge for inpatients. This is part of a range of actions included in the £300 million winter package of funding to health and social care services, as outlined in the winter plan, to take pressure off hospitals and frontline staff. Now, there are two new programmes announced today. One is called Interface Care, and the second one is Discharge Without Delay. And these will support NHS boards to prepare alternatives to hospital care where appropriate, and to improve the discharge process for those who do need to be admitted to hospital. So the first of these, Interface Care, is backed by an additional £6 million this financial year, will deliver safe, high-quality care as an alternative to hospital admission, or will support early hospital discharge. The programme is to be implemented by early winter. The other programme, Discharge Without Delay, supported by a further £4 million, will improve pathways through the hospital settings, reducing inpatient length of stay and building bed capacity. So working along with families and carers and patients is to ensure that patients are treated at home where appropriate. So the idea here, Chris, is first of all, it's about a tie-up, isn't it, between health and social services. We've recognised a long time ago these are not separate disciplines, they have to be partners. And one way of clearing up beds is to say, if we can get that person somewhere else but properly looked after, then let's try and move them out of hospital. So is this enough money?
Yeah.
6 million for one, 4 million for the other?
No, I don't think it's actually enough money. But then I'm obviously slightly biased because you may or may not know I'm an unpaid carer to my elder brother, and my elder brother has been in a hospital and stuff like that. And if it wasn't for people like me that are able to support him back into the community, then he wouldn't be able to go back into the community because, at this moment in time, the harsh reality is the fact that there is, scant support within that sector at this moment in time due to the pandemic, because everybody is stretched to the absolute limit. Look, I mean, I've been on this show nearly what, I don't know, the producer will probably correct us, maybe 4, 5, 6 years. And have been constantly calling for a radical rethink of how we interact social care alongside the NHS, and how people like me, such as unpaid carers, feed into that whole, earlier on we were talking about a transition. This has to be a transition to join up the NHS services.
Yeah.
So many of the NHS services have been fragmented over the years, due to cuts which have came from Westminster. I've seen Scottish governments doing it, whether they be SNP governments or whether they be Labour governments. There have been cuts because of the fact that the cuts have came from Westminster.
Yeah, I know. And in fact,
the past has happened. So the past has happened. Going forward now, I'm only hoping that this will go forward in the radical rethink that the NHS in Scotland needs, which is a more holistic approach to amalgamate social care.
Well, of course, of course. As I said at the start, yes, I think
NHS care.
Yeah, we have to recognise, yes, you can't separate the social care and health; they have to be partners. Yes, I'm sure you're right, Chris. We could certainly devote more resources to that. Incidentally, on Broadcasting Scotland, we will be discussing Rishi Sunak's budget. So talking about the overall resources available, that's going to come up again tomorrow. Now, Chris, I'm just going to ask you to do one final thing. As we were preparing the programme this afternoon, we heard of a sad death of who I think we can definitely describe as a Scottish football legend. So today we heard that Walter Smith has actually died. Walter Smith, former manager of Rangers, Everton, and indeed Scotland for a spell. A legend of Scottish football, Chris?
Not even Scottish football. I would go so far as to say a legend of British football. I said on Twitter earlier on today that the biggest thing that Walter Smith, to my mind, ever done was, for me personally, was to shake my hand after he carried the coffin of Tommy Burns. Such was the magnitude of the man that he tried and did successfully bridge the gap, in the divide, between Rangers and Celtic in that one solitary act. Walter Smith was a great friend of Tommy Burns. Walter Smith, on regular occasions when he was the manager of Everton, as you know, I'm a Liverpool supporter, he broke my heart on many weekend, and similarly, at Parkhead as well. He also broke my heart then.
Oh, I know.
He was, a very successful manager. Some managers have had rather indifferent careers. He was an exception to the rule. He was a very successful manager wherever he went.
Absolutely, yes.
And Scottish football tonight is a very empty place.
We are indeed, yes. I think both sides of the footballing fraternity in Glasgow will agree with your comments there, Chris. A sad loss, Walter Smith. We're going to have to wind up tonight, so it's up to me to thank Chris McCusker for joining us and for your input in tonight's news. We are going to return to some of the themes we've raised tonight in other programmes this week. Broadcasting Scotland is going to be extremely busy over the COP26, which is starting on Sunday here in Glasgow. Some of it's begun already. So that's it for Scotland and 7 tonight. Just before I sign off, if you look below now, you can see a link to our website. If you want to see more of these programmes, or indeed if you want us to increase the range of programmings we're offering, we are dying to get on with it. We just need your support, right? We don't have a licence fee. So if you want to support Broadcasting Scotland, please look at Broadcasting Scot and please subscribe, or by all means make a donation. And we'll be back again at Scotland at 7 tomorrow. So I'll see you later. This is Hugh Stewart, Broadcasting Scotland. Good night. And thanks to you, Chris.
Good night.